Sure. It's warm. You sure you want to take this? Okay, here we go. I totally lost my train of thought. Genes. Let's talk about genes. Yesterday, I gave you guys a crash course. We reviewed how plants make babies. It's on the board over there. Different plants do this different ways. Some plants clone themselves. Some plants need to be pollinated. Some plants can self-pollinate. And that's what we were kind of dialing in on yesterday. Pea plants are able to self-fertilize, and this Austrian monk, Gregor Mendel, noticed this. And being a monk and also interested, and he's got lots of time on his hands, sees these things like, this is interesting. I wonder. And so then he became kind of the world's first geneticist. He started breeding. He allowed plants to breed themselves, and then he bred them with each other, and then he allowed them to self-fertilize again. And he started to take note about how, in this case, a very specific trait, the color of the flowers, how that started to demonstrate generation after generation. So if you were away yesterday, just basically what he did was he allowed plants to self-fertilize to make sure that the genetic code was stable. And then he crossbred purple and white flowers. Those plants then grew up, had plant babies, and the subsequent generation color was all purple again. So after breeding purple and white together, the result was purple. And then he allowed that middle generation to self-fertilize, and then the white came back, which was weird. And so what he deduced, and there was a particular percentage, 35 or 75%, 3 and 4, 75% of the flowers maintained their purpleness, but in 25% or in 1 of 4, the whiteness in the flower color came back. And so and he did this experiment a bunch of times. He noticed these results, and this allowed him to put together kind of 2 sets of laws. Now this is an oversimplification of how it happens in humans, obviously, and in more complex organisms. But as far as simple organisms go, and in lots of traits in other organisms behave this simply. Not as many as we give credence to, but lots of traits do this. Each plant had 2 factors that act as a set of instructions. I didn't make the note on yesterday, but we're going to do it here. The 2 factors that act as sets of instructions, we don't call them factors anymore. What do we call them? What are the 2 factors that act as sets of instructions for a particular trait? We couldn't call them factors. We call them... Sorry, Soham, what was the word? What did you say? What did you say, though? You're close. An allele is a specific representation of a gene. So the gene is the factor. What the gene says specifically, that's the allele. So you're good. Each plant has 2 of these. Each parent donates 1 of them. One factor may dominate over the other if it's present. And so yesterday, to start class, we went through a list of traits that seem to do this in people. There was 9 of them, I think. The widow's peak, whether your thumbs bend weird, whether you can curl your tongue, whether your fingers and toes were webbed, whether you had bonus fingers or toes. There's 9 of these different traits. One of them may dominate, and the female's egg has 1 of the sets of chromosomes with 1 set of alleles. So your mom and your biological dad would have provided the other set of chromosomes. They could code the same or different, but related to it's the same gene. They could have the same or different set of alleles. When the male and female gametes, the gametes were just the general term for sperm and egg, those sex cells. And when they meet during fertilization, their DNA combines and the homologous chromosomes line up. This is grade 9. You've seen this already. You've talked about it at length last year. And homologous chromosomes, we call them, and we reviewed it on day 1 of this unit. These guys pair with the same genes. The alleles may be different, but the genes are the same. Might code for hair color or eye color or hair whirl or whatever. And so then we start getting in here and talking about dominance versus recessive. Mendel was onto something when he said that some traits seem to dominate over others, and you guys demonstrated this too. Some of you were able to roll your tongue. Some of you were able to the hitchhiker's thumb. Some of you have widow's peak. Some of you have a hair that curls one way or the other way. You demonstrated that these variations exist in the population that is you guys. And the alleles have the ability to be dominant or recessive, and the absence or presence of these alleles determines what trait is seen. If an individual has 2 or even just 1 copy of a dominant allele, that trait is going to be observed. That is the definition of dominant. The example I gave to the other block, they were struggling to kind of put these ideas together. I have 2 kids, Jack and Natasha. Jack is the youngest, he's 2. Natasha is 4. And as it stands right now, if both of them are in the room together, Jack will often take his cues from Natasha. He's the younger one by 2 years. Of course, that's what he's going to do. And so what this means is after work, usually I call my wife just to check in, see how things are going. And if she is in the car with the kids, obviously I can't see them. But if I pick up the phone and I call my wife, she puts me through CarPlay, so the kids can all hear me coming through the speaker, can both hear me coming through the speaker system. Usually Natasha will immediately start yelling hi to me. Now, if she's yelling hi and she's the dominant personality, can I know with certainty whether or not Jack is present? He could be. It would make sense that my son is with my wife and daughter, but maybe Jack's with my mom. I don't know. If he is the more recessive personality, he could be present, he might not be present. I don't know. Until I can hear him, I'll have no way of knowing because I can't see them. And so the same is true here with these genes. If a dominant trait is present, you cannot know whether or not the recessive allele is there as well or not. It's not possible to know because the dominant trait overpowers the expression of the recessive trait. And so that's what's meant by this sentence here. If an individual has 2 dominant alleles, that would be the example where just my daughter's in the car. The dominant one is the only one who's present. I'm going to hear my daughter, obviously. But if they're both present, Natasha and Jack, I'm still probably only going to hear my daughter because the dominant one is going to be the one that gets observed. The trait for a recessive allele can only be seen if the individual has 2 copies of the recessive allele. Or, to extend my analogy, if it's Tuesday or Thursday or Monday, actually I could go in order, Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, and I call my wife after school, Natasha's at daycare. There's only one kid. If there's a kid in the back of the car, it can only be Jack because we only have 2 kids. Natasha will be at daycare, Jack will be there. If I come on the speaker and Natasha's not there to yell at me, Jack will. So if she picks up the phone, I hear Jack's voice, Jack's the only one in the car. I mean, obviously other than my wife. But as far as the 2 kids go. So the only way a recessive trait can be seen is if that's the only one present. And now we have derived a system for this in biology. The system looks like this. This blank stands for alleles. We have derived a system to represent alleles so that we can track them from one generation to the next. Dominant alleles are represented with a capital letter, and recessive alleles are represented with a lowercase letter. And in each case, they are the same letter. So for example, if we were going back and talking about the color of a flower, when you're ready, flip the page. If we're going to go ahead and talk about the flowers, the dominant allele in the pea plant was what color? Purple. The dominant allele is for the purple flower, represented by, and in this case, the example has the capital letter A. Why A? I don't know. They picked a letter. You may be given different instructions to tell you which letters to pick. I don't know why A, but A. So if the dominant allele is purple and is represented by a capital A, the recessive allele was the white flower. Its allele is going to get represented by what letter? Lowercase a. Good. So if you know purple, if purple is the color that you can see, there's two options for the allele combination, because you're going to have, everyone has two, one from mom, one from dad. If the flowers are purple, the combination of alleles could be two capital A's or one capital, one small. In both of these cases, you're going to see purple because the dominant allele is present. And for white flowers, the only combination of alleles that could be there if the recessive is present is what? Lowercase, lowercase. Questions, comments, concerns? Cool. What I'd like you to do is flip back now. I want you to go back to this page, the Heredity Notes Genetics activity, and we're going to, if you haven't already, which I hope you haven't because I didn't give you instructions for it, now we are going to fill out the second column. So I'll do two as an example, and then I want you guys to fill out your codes. Tongue rolling. I can't do it. We said here, it says here that if you cannot roll your tongue into a U shape, that is a recessive trait. And in brackets, Imparis and Vikram, they give letters to represent the dominant and recessive genes. That's what, in all of these boxes, that's what these letters in brackets mean at the end. So if I am recessive for tongue rolling, what is the only possible expression I can have for those alleles? Small r, small r. So if you are recessive for a trait, the only way that can happen is if you have two of the lowercase letter. Now I'm going to go down to something that I am dominant for. I have a widow's peak. So in me, that dominant trait shows up. And I can see in a bunch of you, you have it too. Because I have the dominant trait there, I know I have to have at least one dominant allele. But I can't know anything about the second allele. Because my options here, as long as I've got one capital V, the letter is V for this one, as long as I've got one capital V, it's going to show up. So the other letter could be either a small v or another big V. I don't know. It's impossible to know at this stage which one it's going to be. So if you're dominant for any of these traits, you're going to have two possibilities. Again, we don't know. We can't know which one it is. But if you're recessive, you're only going to have one. I want you to go through and I want you to give me the G. And these are called, which we're going to go talk about more in a second, these are all called genotypes. The combination of letters that give you your genetic code are called genotypes. I want you to give me the genotype for each trait on this list that you were able to identify in you. Some of us weren't. Some of you weren't able to, or just chose not to. Show me things like widow's peak or earlobes or whatever. For as many traits as you looked at, give me the genotype. Let me know if you've got any questions. Some of you may be done already. You're recessive. So when you have that many, well, for so many of those traits, because you are representing, all your traits are the recessive side, you know exactly what you got from your parents. Do you know if your parents are recessive for this as well, for any of these traits? Did you go home and look? That would be interesting then to see what, because if you're, for example, one of these you had the earlobes. If your biological dad, biological mom both have the same earlobes, the recessive ones you do, or if they don't, it'd be more interesting if they didn't, if they had free earlobes. Then we could start to identify what their genotype was, because they have it, you don't. So So your dads are like yours, and your moms are the dominant trait. Interesting. So then the only so your dad is recessive like you are. He's going to be LL. But if your mom, the only way for you to also be LL is if your mom gave you one of these two L's. So your mom's is going to look like that. Because you would have gotten one of these from mom and one of these from dad. If dad looks like this, like you do, mom has to be this thing. And so we can start to make inferences about genetic code, which is cool. Okay, we've gone through. Neat. Almost done. Keep going. Cool. Oh, you should know. Why did you not write out the head there? Sorry. It was good. Okay, totally how it was. How are we doing over here? Finished? No. That's not the way this goes. Everyone, 2 letters. Like I did before. If it's dominant, you have to have both. You have to have, and so both possibilities have to exist. But, can I just use an example? Can I just say exactly what we're talking about? Okay, cool. So, like everyone's attention here for a sec because Victor Grimm asked a good question, and Puneet's family is actually going to provide the answer, which is really cool. So, specific example, Puneet is recessive for the earlobe one. Like me, and like so many of you, her earlobes are attached. So that is lowercase l is the genotype we have. Her dad is too. Her mom is not. Her mom has earlobes like Ibarra does, where they're not connected right across the bottom. They go back up, and then after they've gone up, they touch that. So that means, Vikram, if Puneet's mom is dominant for that trait, she has to have at least one capital L. She could be capital L, or capital L lowercase l. We can get more specific because we know one allele comes from mom, one allele comes from dad, and we know offspring in this case is recessive. So if one of these came from mom and one of these came from dad, what can you say about mom's genotype? Puneet's mom has to have one recessive allele and one dominant allele. She's going to look like the dominant expression is what's going to be present, but because Puneet isn't dominant and neither is dad, we know Puneet's mom had to have provided a lowercase allele. So now we can say specifically, Puneet's mom has to have that genotype. But at this stage, until you start having kids, we can't know. You feel free to wait a good long time for this. I don't care badly enough at this stage to know what your kids' genetic expression is going to look like. Oh, is there a test going on there? Cool. Perfect. Oh, sorry. Sorry. It's cool. Okay. Thank you, Puneet. Vikram, does that help? Okay. So, you should have your genotype code there. Now I want you to flip back to the page we were on before. Here we go. We have language for this. More language. Using the previous example and so many of your guys' own examples, the combinations of alleles that are possible, in the example of the flowers, purple flowers could be big A, or big A, little a for purple flowers, and only little a for white flowers. We call that code, I've been referencing it now a few times, we call those genotypes. And an organism's genotype is the specific combination of alleles, the actual expressions of those genes that an organism has for a specific gene. And your genotype is going to be different than another person's genotype as you look at all of the traits that make you you. Now, we've got ways to label the different kinds of genotypes, because there's 3 here. Even though there's 2 different physical expressions, purple or white, there's actually 3 different kinds of genotypes here. Either they're both dominant, both recessive, or a mix of the 2. And so we've got language to help us talk about that in a more condensed way, and here's what it is. The genotypes is this blank here, are described as being either heterozygous or homozygous. So let's define this. These are prefixes you've seen before. What does that prefix hetero mean? You've 2 different. Like if you think back to the mixtures in Science 9, when you guys were right at the beginning of chemistry, you have different kinds of mixtures. You have either a heterogeneous or a homogeneous mixture. Homogeneous means it was the same throughout. Heterogeneous means there were specific parts of the mixture that were obviously different from other parts. So heterogeneous, if you know your genotype is heterogeneous, that means you've got 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele. So if we go back to the example of Puneet's parents, the allele, the genotype for earlobes has to be heterogeneous. It's heterozygous. We're not talking about mixtures, we're talking about genotypes. Heterozygous. In the case of the pea plants, it's going to be big A, little a. If the genotype is homozygous, that means you have 2 of the same allele. Either big A, or little a. Yes? Until you start having kids. And even then, it would depend on your partner and what their representations are. We could start making some deductions. Unless we did a full genetic breakdown of you, the only way for us to know what your guys' genotypes are is for you guys to make the choice to start having children. Please don't make that choice for a good long while yet. I have taught students who have had children in high school. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. I would, as emphatically as I possibly can, don't do it. It was a bad choice. So if we slide back up here, these 2 expressions are the homozygous expressions. This guy here is the heterozygous. And we can start actually labeling these further. If these guys are both homozygous, how could I differentiate between the 2 kinds of homozygous? Big A is going to be homozygous dominant. Very good. That is the dominant trait. So this is going to be homozygous dominant. This guy's going to be homozygous recessive. And then we haven't talked about it yet, but we will next week. Heterozygous can show up 3 different ways. Here, with this particular trait, heterozygous was a complete dominance. A heterozygous code in this flower plant, or pea plant, was purple. But there's different kinds of heterozygous dominance. You can be codominant. You can be incompletely dominant. And if you're codominant, or incompletely dominant, or completely dominant, Heterozygous is going to look like 3 different things. We'll talk about that next week. So if we slide down here, these are this is homologous chromosomes. I'll label one as coming from your biological mom, one is coming from biological dad. And on these particular chromosomes, there's 3 specific examples of genes and alleles. You've got the P gene, the A gene, and the B gene. Mom provided one, dad provided the other. This is you down here at the bottom. This is your genotype, whoever you are. And we can start making labels for these things. If you got a dominant P gene and a dominant P gene, then your genotype for this is going to be homozygous dominant for this particular trait. I'll slide this down so you can see it on the screen a little better for some of you at the back. If you are, for the A trait, whatever A is, obviously you don't have purple flowers or white flowers because that would be weird because you're not a plant. But whatever the A gene codes for, again, you're homozygous for it because you have lowercase a, but you're homozygous recessive. And then the B gene, whatever it is, your genotype is going to be heterozygous. Just at this point, just heterozygous. Because we haven't talked about the different kinds of heterozygous dominance yet. When you're ready, flip the page. Oh, nope.
Please excuse this interruption. At this time, we are going to shelter in place. Activate shelter in place now. Activate shelter in place now. Activate shelter in place now. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so usually 95% of the time when they call a shelter in place, it means that somewhere in the school there's a medical issue, and they don't want kids in the hall either coughing, filming, getting in the way of paramedics. Sometimes it's something going on in the community, like if there's someone decides to hold up 7-Eleven, Abbey PD will call the local school bus, Dodson Middle School, and they'll call a shelter in place, just lock the building from the outside, kids in class, good kids, nothing to worry about. Shelter in place is great, we like shelter in place. Lockdowns, we don't like lockdowns. Shelter in place is fun. Just means you guys can't go pee, so sorry about that. So, let us continue. So, that's genotype. This blank here, the genotype, or genotypes, plural, code for specific features. How these features are expressed in an organism. So when your genotype is your genes, it's the allele code that you have. When it shows up in you, you look around the classroom like, ah yes, widow's peak. Ah yes, cool tongue thing. Ah yes, weird thumbs. When you can actually see the physical trait in people, that's called a phenotype. How the genotype is actually expressed physically, we call a genotype. So, using the previous examples, there were 3 genotypes in flowers. Genotypes were big A, little a, or little a, little a. For the purple and white pea flowers. What are the possible phenotypes here for this specific pea plant? If the pea plant was big A, what's it going to look like? It's going to have purple flowers. If it's big A, it's going to have purple flowers. Because purple is the dominant trait. If it's got 2 recessive genes, the phenotype is going to be white. Cool. Comments, questions, concerns? Yes. Those are different kinds of heterozygous. We'll talk about that over in your notes if you flip way. You don't have to do this, but way ahead. This page with the cow. We're going to talk about codominance and incomplete dominance. This is what these concepts are possibilities that arise when the genotype is heterozygous. For example, this cow. This is a cow of several colors. That means that this cow, or in this case, I guess it's a bull, no, it's a cow, is heterozygous, and we know it's heterozygous because the particular trait here, cow color, is what we call codominant. It means if both genes are present, both colors will be fully expressed. So if you have a cow that's brown and white, you know that thing has to be heterozygous. But if you have a brown cow, it's homozygous. I don't know if it's dominant or recessive, but it's going to be homozygous. And if you have a white cow, it's going to be homozygous. And some traits blend like this. Gemini, get off the internet. Okay, no, it's so many of you are on the internet. Get off the internet, all of you. Here, questions. I want you to practice these 3 questions. I'm going to add something to question number 1. It says here, for each genotype, indicate whether it is heterozygous and or homozygous. For the heterozygous ones, I want you to tell me if it's homozygous recessive with an R or dominant with a D. So any of the genotypes that are heterozygous, you're going to put an HE. Any of the ones that are homozygous, you're going to do HO dash R or dash D. For the homozygous ones, you're going to tell me if it's homozygous recessive or homozygous dominant. And for the heterozygous ones, it's just, there's only one option. It's heterozygous. That's question 1. And then question 2 and 3 asks you to give specific phenotypes, given a genotype, and then given a genotype for a phenotype. Okay.